Hello everyone, and welcome to BytonX Video Academy. In this video, we will analyze why there is a strong likelihood of a Federal Reserve rate cut in June this year, focusing on the perspective of U.S. Treasury debt maturity. The distribution of U.S. Treasury maturities, refinancing pressure, and interest payment costs have long been key factors influencing the Federal Reserve's monetary policy decisions. Under the current circumstances, these factors are likely to play a decisive role. Considering the current structure of U.S. debt maturities, the fiscal deficit, and market liquidity demands, June 2025 may become a critical window for a Fed rate cut. At the end of 2019, the total U.S. national debt stood at $23 trillion. By early 2025, it has surged to over $36 trillion, hitting a record high, a more than 50% increase in just 5 years. Servicing this $36 trillion in debt requires $1.1 trillion in annual interest payments. In contrast, the U.S. government's 2024 fiscal revenue was only $4.9 trillion, while expenditures reached $6.8 trillion. With such a massive fiscal deficit and essential national expenses to cover, the $1.1 trillion interest bill is clearly beyond the capacity of the $4.9 trillion revenue base. Of the $36 trillion in national debt, $9.2 trillion is set to mature in 2025, an extraordinary amount. Notably, $6.5 trillion is due in June alone, significantly more than any other month, earning it the title Debt Flood Month for the U.S. These maturing bonds are mainly short and medium-term, issued during President Biden's term. After Biden took office, he promptly initiated rate cuts, and with abundant market liquidity, the administration issued a large volume of short-term debt at relatively high interest rates. Now, however, it is the Trump administration that must repay them. Putting aside partisan disputes, the maturing debt in June represents a sword of Damocles hanging over the U.S. government. The government must raise enough funds before June to repay maturing debt. Otherwise, the creditworthiness of the U.S. dollar will be severely undermined, shaking the foundations of the American economy. Failure to meet debt obligations on time would also make future Treasury issuances unmarketable, breaking the cycle of borrowing that sustains U.S. government operations and potentially triggering major social unrest. However, issuing new debt at high interest rates would only worsen future repayment burdens and deepen the crisis. Therefore, it is critical for the U.S. to successfully issue a large volume of low-interest bonds around June to maintain the continuity of its financial operations. So, how can the U.S. persuade investors to willingly purchase lower-yielding bonds? The only effective way appears to be boosting market confidence in the U.S. financial system, creating the perception of abundant liquidity and lower costs for acquiring U.S. dollar assets. Given these factors, the Federal Reserve is compelled to cut rates around June to alleviate the looming Treasury crisis. If this crisis remains unresolved, the credibility of the dollar will be deeply damaged, weakening the Fed's central role in U.S. financial markets and potentially strengthening Trump's case for reclaiming power.